The crystalline spires of the Velthari dominion stretched impossibly high into the violet sky of Kepler-4 to be, their surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of conquest and absolute dominion. Within the highest tower, the apex, Queen Xylera floated in her neural pool, her 6 arms weaving through the saptic fluid as she communed with the collective consciousness of her species. For 3 millennia, the Velthari had carved their empire across 17 star systems, consuming entire civilizations and incorporating their knowledge into their vast neural network. They were apex predators of the galaxy, each individual connected to the hive mind, each thought shared across billions of beings. They had never encountered a species that could resist their mental domination. Until now. Bring forth the human specimen. Xylera's voice resonated through the chamber, carried not by sound but by direct neural transmission to her servants. The doors dilated with a wet, organic sound, and 6 Velthari warriors escorted a small figure into the vast chamber. The human appeared insignificant, barely reaching the shoulder of her captors, with dark hair matted by weeks of imprisonment and clothes torn from her capture. On the mining colony of Titan's Edge, Kira Voss kept her eyes fixed on the floor, playing the part of the broken prisoner. At 19, she was the youngest member of the Terran Resistance's Omega Division, but age meant nothing when humanity's survival hung in the balance. The neural implant behind her left ear invisible to Velthari scanners pulsed with barely contained energy, so small, Xylera mused, her massive form rising from the neural pool, standing nearly 4 meters tall. Her chitinous exoskeleton gleamed with an oily sheen, and her 4 eyes focused on Kira with predatory interest. This is what the humans send to challenge us. A child, the Velthari warriors chittered in amusement, their minds linked to their queen's derision. They had seen the recordings from the massacre at Titan's Edge, 12,000 humans slaughtered. In hours, their mining stations reduced to molten slag. This girl was supposedly a survivor, captured during the final assault. Your species fascinates me, Xylera continued, her mental voice dripping with condescension. You fight with such desperation, such futile hope. Even now, after witnessing our power, you still believe you can win. Kira's hands trembled not from fear, but from the effort of containing the quantum processor burning in her neural pathways. The Omega Division had spent 2 years developing this weapon, sacrificing their best minds to create something that could interface with Velthari biotechnology. The implant contained the collective knowledge of every human military strategist, every tactical genius, every warrior who had ever lived, compressed into a quantum matrix that could think at the speed of light. But it was also killing her. The human brain wasn't designed to process information at such speeds. She had maybe 10 minutes before the neural pathways overloaded and turned her into a vegetable. 10 minutes to destroy the most powerful species in the galaxy. You will tell me the location of your remaining colonies, Xylera demanded, her mental probe beginning to push against Kira's consciousness. You will share your military codes, your supply routes, your weaknesses, and then you will beg for the privilege of serving the Dominion. Kira felt the alien mind pressing against her thoughts, seeking to dominate and control. The Velthari Queen's arrogance was absolute. She had never encountered a mind that could resist her power. The probe pushed deeper, confident in its superiority. That confidence would be her undoing. I have a better idea, Kira whispered, finally raising her head to meet the Apex Queen's gaze. Her eyes were no longer human. They glowed with the cold light of quantum processing, data streams flickering across her irises like digital fire. Xylera's probe struck the quantum matrix and recoiled in shock. This wasn't a human mind, it was something far more dangerous. The girl's consciousness had been weaponized, turned into a viral program designed to infiltrate and corrupt the Velthari collective. What? The Apex Queen began, but it was already too late. Kira smiled, and the universe changed forever. The quantum virus erupted from Kira's consciousness like a digital plague, racing through the neural link that Xylera had so confidently established. The Apex Queen's mind, accustomed to dominating lesser beings, suddenly found itself under assault by something that operated on principles beyond her comprehension. Impossible. Xylera's scream echoed both psychically and physically through the chamber. Her massive form convulsed as the virus tore through her neural pathways, rewriting saptic connections and corrupting data streams that had remained stable for millennia. The Velthari warriors immediately sensed their queen's distress through the collective link. their chitinous forms shifted into combat stance, bioweapons extending from their forearms like living blades. But they were already too late. The virus was spreading through the hive mind, infecting every connected consciousness. Kira felt the quantum processor in her skull burning white-hot as it interfaced with the alien network. Information flowed in torrents: military positions, fleet compositions, the locations of every Velthari world. But more importantly, she was learning their deepest secret, the source of their collective consciousness. The Velthari weren't truly telepathic. They used a form of quantum entanglement maintained by specialized organs in their brains, creating a network that allowed instantaneous communication across vast distances. But like any network, it had vulnerabilities. "You're not apex predators," Kira gasped, blood trickling from her nose as the neural strain intensified. "You're just very good parasites." The virus reached the primary neural hub buried deep within the tower's foundation, a massive organic computer that coordinated the thoughts of 12 billion Velthari across their empire. The moment it made contact, chaos erupted throughout. The Dominion dot on the bridge of the Velthari flagship Devourer's Maw. Admiral Vexthara suddenly screamed as her connection to the collective was severed. Around her, bridge crew collapsed as their shared consciousness fragmented into isolated, terrified individuals. For the first time in their lives, they were truly alone in their own minds. The same scene played out across 17 star systems. Velthari warriors stopped mid-charge as their coordination failed. Pilots crashed their ships as the shared navigational network collapsed. The mighty Dominion fleet, once moving in perfect synchronization, dissolved into confusion and panic. But the virus was only the first phase of humanity's plan. Now, Kira whispered into her neural implant's emergency transmitter. 300 light-years away, Admiral Reeves Dalton received the signal aboard the Terran dreadnought Prometheus Rising. He was 67 years old, a veteran of 43 space battles, and he had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. "All ships, execute Operation Omega," he commanded. "The Dominion falls today." The human fleet emerged from hyperspace. In perfect formation, 600 ships representing every world in the Terran Federation. They had spent months positioning themselves at strategic points throughout Velthari space, waiting for the signal that their secret weapon had succeeded. Unlike the elegant, biomechanical ships of the Velthari, human vessels were brutal affairs, of steel and plasma fire. They had been designed by a species that understood war as a fundamental aspect of existence, not the surgical precision of a hive mind, but the chaotic fury of individual warriors fighting for their survival. The Velthari fleet tried to respond, but their coordination was shattered. Ships that had once moved like dancers now collided with each other in confusion. Weapon systems that relied on collective targeting suddenly found themselves firing at empty space. Back in the Spire, Exilera was experiencing true terror for the first time in her 3,000-year existence. The virus had severed her connection to the collective, leaving her trapped in her own consciousness. She could feel her empire crumbling as the network that had sustained it for millennia collapsed. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her eyes blazing with rage and fear. Kira's body was failing as the quantum processor consumed her neural tissue, but her mind had never been clearer. Through the corrupted network, she could see the entire battle unfolding: human ships tearing through the Velthari fleet like wolves among sheep. "I've shown you what humanity really is," she said, her voice growing weaker as blood flowed freely from her ears. "We're not just another species for you to consume. We're the thing that hunts apex predators." One of the Velthari warriors lunged at her with his bio-blade, but Kira's enhanced reflexes, boosted by the quantum processor's tactical algorithms, allowed her to dodge with inhuman speed. She grabbed a shard of crystalline debris and drove it into the warrior's neck, severing his neural stem. The Velthari fell, his mind already fragmenting as the connection to his collective died. Around the chamber, the other warriors were experiencing the same dissolution, their shared identity crumbling into isolated consciousness. But Kira's victory was costing her everything. The quantum processor was literally burning out her brain, each second of operation destroying more neural tissue. She had maybe 2 minutes before complete system failure, 2 minutes to finish what she had started. The Velthari Dominion's collapse accelerated with horrifying speed across their 17 conquered star systems. The effects of the quantum virus spread like wildfire through their biological networks. What had once been the galaxy's most coordinated empire was dissolving into chaos on the agricultural world of Vesha Prime. Velthari overseers suddenly found themselves unable to control their slave populations. The neural implants that had kept millions of beings docile for decades flickered and died. As the collective network failed, across the planet, revolts erupted as enslaved species realized their captors were vulnerable. In the asteroid mining fields of Sector 77, Velthari work crews began attacking each other as their shared purpose fragmented into competing individual drives. Ships crashed into mining platforms, creating massive explosions that could be seen from orbit. But it was in space where the real devastation began. Admiral Dalton watched from the bridge of Prometheus Rising as his fleet tore through the Velthari battle group defending their home system. The enemy ships were magnificent living vessels that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, their hulls capable of regenerating minor damage. But without coordination, they were helpless. "Target the command ship," Dalton ordered, his weathered face grim with determination. "All batteries, fire at will." The human dreadnought's main guns unleashed streams of superheated plasma that punched through the Velthari flagship's organic armor. The ship writhed like a wounded animal as its hull began to rupture, venting atmosphere and biofluids into space. Captain Elena Vasquez, commanding the heavy cruiser Retribution, pressed her attack against the Velthari battle carrier. Her ship's missile tubes launched salvo after salvo of quantum torpedoes, each one designed to disrupt the organic neural networks that controlled enemy vessels. "Their fighter pilots are flying into each other," her tactical officer reported with grim satisfaction. "They can't coordinate their attacks anymore." The Velthari had bred their pilots to function as components of a larger organism individually. They were skilled but lacked the independent thinking necessary for single combat. Human pilots, trained to think and react as individuals, were slaughtering them. Back in the crystalline spire, Kira was fighting a losing battle against her own biology. The quantum processor had burned through 60% of her neural tissue, and her body was beginning to shut down. But she could still sense the network, still feel the virus spreading through the Velthari collective. "Please," Ixylera begged, her massive form huddled against the chamber wall. The Apex Queen who had ruled 17 star systems was reduced to a terrified creature, cut off from the collective consciousness that had defined her existence. "Make it stop. I'll give you anything, territory, resources, anything you want." "You still don't understand," Kira gasped, her voice barely audible as blood filled her lungs. "This isn't about territory. This is about survival. You came to exterminate us, and now we're returning the favor." The remaining Velthari warriors in the chamber had begun attacking each other as their individual personalities emerged from the collective. Without the hive mind to suppress their personal desires and fears, they were experiencing the full horror of isolated consciousness for the first time. One warrior, his carapace scarred from decades of battle, suddenly remembered his name, Kethmaran. He remembered choosing to join the military caste, remembered the day his individuality was subsumed into the collective. The memory brought rage and anguish in equal measure. "What have we done?" he whispered, staring at his claws still wet with human blood from the Titan's Edge massacre. "What have we become?" The psychological trauma was spreading throughout the Dominion. Billions of Velthari were suddenly experiencing individual consciousness for the first time in their lives. Many were going insane from the isolation, while others turned to violence as they struggled to understand their new reality. But the human fleet showed no mercy. They had seen the footage from the conquered world's entire civilizations reduced to slavery or extinction, their cultures destroyed, and their populations processed into biofuel for the Dominion ships. There would be no quarter given, no negotiation offered. Commander Zhang Wei, leading the destroyer squadron Ghost Division, coordinated surgical strikes against Velthari communication nodes. Each node destroyed further fragmented the collective, isolating more segments of their forces. "Target the bioprocessing facilities," he commanded. "No survivors." The facilities where billions of sentient beings had been reduced to raw materials were obliterated in nuclear fire. It was a mercy, killing most of the victims were already dead. Their consciousness dissolved into the collective while their bodies were harvested for resources. On the planet's surface, Velthari civilians were experiencing the collapse of their society in real time. Their cities, once marvels of biological engineering, began to decay as the controlling intelligence that maintained them was severed from the network. Buildings designed to self-repair started consuming themselves, while transportation systems failed as their organic components died in the tower. Kira felt her consciousness beginning to fragment as the quantum processor reached critical failure. But she had one last task to complete. Through the dying network, she could sense the location of the Velthari's deepest secret, their breeding worlds, where the next generation of the collective was being prepared. "Admiral Dalton," she whispered into her implant, her words barely coherent as her brain tissue continued to burn. "Coordinates, uploading now, finish them." The coordinates appeared on Dalton's tactical display, 17 worlds hidden in the galactic core, each one home to billions of Velthari eggs and nurseries, the future of their species, carefully protected and hidden from potential enemies. "All ships," Dalton commanded, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's judgment. "Jump to the breeding worlds. We end this permanently." As the human fleet prepared to execute the final phase of Operation Omega, Kira's vision began to fade. The quantum processor had consumed her neural pathways, but the virus continued to spread through the Velthari network. Her sacrifice had shattered the most powerful empire in the galaxy. But the war was far from over. The transition to hyperspace felt different this time. Admiral Dalton had made over 300 jumps in his career. But as the Prometheus Rising tore through dimensional barriers toward the Velthari breeding worlds, he knew this would be his last campaign. The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on him like a physical force. Genocide. The word hung unspoken in his mind as the fleet emerged from hyperspace around Nest Prime, the primary breeding world of the Velthari Dominion. The planet was a massive organic construct, its surface writhing with biomechanical cities that housed trillions of developing Velthari larvae. "My God," whispered Captain Sarah Chen from the bridge of the assault carrier Righteous Fury. "It's alive. The entire planet is alive." The world pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that created a hypnotic display across its surface. Massive organic towers stretched into the upper atmosphere, connected by writhing bridges that transported nutrients and genetic material to the developing young. It was beautiful in its alien way, a testament to millions of years of biological engineering. And they were here to destroy it all. The Velthari defenders were in chaos, without the collective consciousness to coordinate their movements. The planetary defense fleet attacked the human forces in uncoordinated waves. Individual ships fought with desperate fury, but they were no match for the tactical cohesion of the human fleet. Commander Isabella Rodriguez, leading the fast attack group, Sword of Terra, exploited gaps in the enemy formation with ruthless efficiency. Her ships moved like a pack of wolves, isolating individual Velthari vessels and overwhelming them with concentrated fire. Enemy battleship, bearing to 7 Mark 6. Her tactical officer reported, "She's trying to ram us." Evasive maneuvers. Rodriguez commanded, "Let's show them how humans dance." The Velthari battleship, its hull pulsing with organic rage, missed its target by mere meters. Rodriguez's squadron immediately pounced, their plasma cannons tearing through the enemy vessels. Bioarmor. The ship died, screaming a sound that transmitted through space via quantum resonance, audible to any vessel with biocompatible sensors. But the defenders weren't completely helpless. As the virus continued to spread through the network, some Velthari began to adapt, cut off from the collective. They started thinking as individuals for the first time in their lives. Some went insane from the isolation, but others discovered something their species had forgotten: personal initiative. Captain Vextara, formerly of the Devourer's Maw, had managed to retain control of her ship as the collective collapsed. Her crew was dead or insane, but the ship's biomechanical systems still responded to her commands. She had been a warrior before joining the collective, and now those memories were flooding back. "Human fleet," she broadcast on an open channel, her voice carrying centuries of individual pain and rage. "You have destroyed everything we were. Now we will show you what we can become." Her ship began to change, its hull rippling as dormant genetic sequences activated. The Velthari had once been a species of shapeshifters, but the collective had suppressed that ability in favor of standardized forms. Now, freed from those constraints, the ship began to evolve in real time. New weapon systems erupted from its hull like malignant growths. Armor plating thickened and developed reactive properties. Most terrifyingly, the ship began to split, dividing into smaller vessels that retained the original's capabilities. "Admiral," the tactical officer aboard Prometheus Rising reported with barely controlled panic, "the enemy ship is reproducing. We're reading multiple new contacts where there was one before. Dalton watched in fascination and horror as the Velthari vessel became a dozen smaller ships, each one attacking his fleet with independent tactical thinking. It was like watching evolution and fast-forward the species adapting to survive in the space of minutes. All ships, new tactical priority, he commanded. Prevent any enemy vessel from dividing. Use quantum torpedoes if necessary. The quantum torpedoes were humanity's most destructive weapons, each one capable of destabilizing matter. At the subatomic level, they had been designed specifically to counter Velthari bioregeneration, and they were horrifyingly effective. The first torpedo struck Vexthara's command ship as it attempted to divide again. The weapon's quantum field destabilized the ship's organic matrix, causing it to collapse into its component atoms. The death scream that echoed through space was unlike anything the humans had heard before, the sound of a creature that had transcended its original form, dying in agony. But the attack had cost them. 3 human ships were destroyed in the exchange, their crews of nearly 2,000 people reduced to atoms in energy. The casualties were mounting on both sides as the battle intensified. On the planet's surface, the effects of the network collapse were becoming apparent. The organic cities that had housed the breeding populations were beginning to fail as their controlling intelligence died. But this failure was releasing something unexpected: millions of Velthari larvae that were developing without the collective's influence. These new generation Velthari were different. Without the network to shape their development, they were evolving along lines that their species hadn't seen for millions of years. Some were becoming more aggressive, others more intelligent, and a few were developing abilities that their ancestors had possessed but the collective had suppressed. Dr. Elena Vasquez, monitoring the situation from her research vessel Darwin's Dream, watched in fascination as the evolutionary process accelerated on the planet below. Admiral, we have a problem. The planetary population is adapting faster than our models predicted. If we don't act soon, we might be facing a completely new species. Dalton made the hardest decision of his career. All ships, prepare for planetary bombardment. We're going to sterilize the surface, the weapons that had been designed to crack. Planets began charging their quantum cores. In 30 minutes, they would reduce Nest Prime to a lifeless ball of rock and metal. Trillions of developing Velthari would die, along with any hope of their species' survival. But as the human fleet prepared for the final act of genocide, sensors detected new contacts emerging from hyperspace. The reinforcements weren't human. They were something else entirely. The newcomers materialized at the edge of the system like ghosts emerging from nightmare. Their ships were unlike anything in the databases of either species' crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them, creating distortions in space that hurt to look at directly. Unknown contacts, reported the sensor operator aboard Prometheus Rising, his voice tight with confusion. 15, no, 20 vessels. They're not Velthari, and they're definitely not human. Admiral Dalton felt his blood chill as the implications hit him. Are we looking at a third party? Before anyone could answer, the alien ships opened fire. The weapons they used were beyond current understanding, beams of twisted spacetime that punched through both human and Velthari vessels with equal ease. The energy discharges didn't follow normal physics. They curved around obstacles, phased through shields, and seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The heavy cruiser Iron Resolve was the first to die. The enemy beam struck her amidships, and the entire vessel simply folded, not destroyed, not vaporized, folded into a geometric impossibility that the human mind couldn't process. The crew of 800 souls vanished with their ship into whatever dimension the weapon had opened. All ships, evasive action, Dalton commanded. But the enemy fire was already spreading through both fleets. A Velthari bioship twisted in agony as a dimensional beam rewrote its genetic structure, turning it inside out in seconds. Captain Rodriguez, commanding the fast attack group, tried to close with the mysterious vessels. Her squadron moved with the precision that had served them well against the Velthari. But these new enemies seemed to anticipate their every move. They're reading our tactical patterns in real time, she reported as her ships dodged another volley of impossible fire. It's like they know what we're going to do before we do it. The battle devolved into chaos as 3 separate forces clashed in the space around Nest Prime. Human ships fought with desperate fury, their plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes seeking targets that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. The Velthari, still adapting to individual consciousness, struck back with bioweapons that evolved in real time to counter specific threats. But the newcomers, whoever they were, fought with a clinical precision that spoke of vast experience and superior technology. Commander Zhang Wei, leading the destroyer squadron, found himself facing one of the alien vessels in single combat. His ship, Ghost Runner, was fast and maneuverable, but the enemy seemed to exist in multiple locations. Simultaneously, fire quantum torpedoes, full spread, he ordered. But the weapons passed through empty space where his sensors insisted the target was located. The return fire came from 3 different directions. At once, Zhang's ship bucked as dimensional beams tore through his hull, killing half his crew instantly. But the Ghost Runner was built by humans, tough, stubborn, and designed to keep fighting even when it should be dead. Engineering. "Give me everything you've got," Zhang commanded through gritted teeth. "We're going to ram that bastard." The destroyer accelerated toward the alien vessel at maximum thrust, its hull glowing white-hot from the strain. At the last second, the enemy ship materialized fully in normal space apparently. It couldn't maintain its dimensional phase while under direct attack. The collision was spectacular. The Ghost Runner struck the alien vessel amidships, her quantum core detonating on impact. Both ships vanished in a ball of exotic matter and twisted spacetime. That took several minutes to collapse back into normal dimensions. But Zhang's sacrifice had revealed something crucial about their new enemies. They could be hurt. Admiral Dalton immediately transmitted this information to all human vessels. All ships target the enemy when they're firing. They have to phase into normal space to use their weapons. The tide of battle began to shift as the human fleet adapted their tactics. Years of fighting various alien species had taught them to think quickly and improvise. The Velthari, still struggling with individual consciousness, began to learn from the human example. Captain Vexthara, commanding the last surviving Velthari battle group, found herself coordinating with human ships for the first time in her species' history. The irony wasn't lost on her. The humans had been on the verge of exterminating her people, and now they were fighting side by side against a common threat: human vessel retribution. She transmitted to Captain Vasquez, "My ship can phase lock onto the enemy when they materialize. Your weapons can finish them." It was a desperate alliance born of necessity, but it worked. The combined human Velthari task force began systematically hunting the alien ships, using biosensors to detect their phase transitions and quantum weapons to destroy them when they materialized. But the cost was horrific. The human fleet had lost 60% of its ships, with casualties approaching 50,000. The Velthari losses were even worse. Their bioships, designed to work in perfect coordination, were vulnerable when forced to operate independently. On the planet below, the situation was becoming critical. The bombardment from all 3 fleets had damaged the organic cities, but it had also accelerated the evolutionary process. The Velthari larvae were now developing at an unprecedented rate, some reaching maturity in hours instead of decades. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring from her damaged research vessel, watched in horror as the planet's surface began to change. "Admiral, whatever's happening down there, it's not natural. The evolutionary pressure is forcing rapid speciation. Some of these new forms are God. They're beautiful and terrifying at the same time." The new Velthari were indeed different from their ancestors. Some had developed wings and were taking to the skies in massive swarms. Others had grown to enormous size, becoming living weapons that could fire bioplasma from specialized organs. A few had developed intelligence far beyond the original species, their minds crackling with individual creativity that the collective had suppressed for millennia. But most disturbing of all were the ones that had begun to phase shift like the mysterious attackers. They were learning to exist in multiple dimensions, becoming something beyond the original Velthari form. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez reported with growing alarm, "I think we know who our mysterious attackers are. They're future Velthari or what?" The Velthari could become given enough evolutionary pressure. The revelation hit Dalton like a physical blow. They hadn't just broken the Velthari collective, they had accelerated their evolution into something far more dangerous. And now these future beings had traveled back in time to ensure their own existence. The battle was no longer about human survival versus Velthari expansion. It had become a fight for the fundamental nature of reality itself. The temporal implications struck Admiral Dalton with the force of a quantum torpedo. If the mysterious attackers were indeed evolved Velthari from a potential future, then every action in this battle was simultaneously creating and preventing the very outcome they were fighting against. Temporal paradox, he muttered, feeling the weight of causality pressing down on him. We're not just fighting for survival, we're fighting for the right to exist. The battle around Nest Prime had evolved into something beyond conventional warfare. Human ships found themselves caught between the desperate bioships of the present-day Velthari and the impossible geometries of their future descendants. Each engagement changed the probability matrices governing the timeline, creating ripple effects that manifested as shifts in the fundamental laws of physics. Captain Rodriguez, commanding the last operational squadron of human attack ships, found herself facing an enemy that existed across multiple temporal states simultaneously. Her Sword of Terra fired quantum torpedoes at targets that hadn't been born yet, while dodging bioplasma from ships that were dying in several different timelines. Temporal mechanics were never covered in the Academy, she grimly joked to her tactical officer as they maneuvered through a field of causality distortions. But the joke died in her throat as she witnessed something that defied every law of physics she understood. One of the future Velthari vessels was literally rewriting history around itself, creating pocket universes where different outcomes existed simultaneously. In one reality, the human fleet was winning. In another, humanity had never evolved. In a third, the Velthari had never developed the collective consciousness. All ships, fall back to the outer system, Dalton commanded. We need to regroup and figure out what we're really fighting. But retreat was no longer an option. The future Velthari had surrounded the human fleet with temporal loops, creating a closed system where past, present, and future existed in superposition. Every human ship that tried to escape found itself returning to the same coordinates, trapped in a causality web that grew stronger with each attempted escape. On the planet below, the evolutionary acceleration had reached critical mass. Dr. Vasquez watched in fascination and horror as the surface of Nest Prime became a laboratory for directed evolution. The Velthari larvae were no longer following natural development patterns. They were consciously choosing their evolutionary paths, guided by instincts that wouldn't exist for millions of years. It's like they're remembering their own future, she reported to the fleet. The evolutionary pressure isn't random, it's being directed by temporal echoes from potential timelines. Some of the new Velthari were developing abilities that transcended physical laws. They could phase through matter, manipulate local gravity, and most disturbing of all, communicate across temporal boundaries. The collective consciousness that humanity had shattered was reforming on a level that encompassed not just space, but time itself. Captain Vexthara, still commanding her damaged bioship, found herself in the unique position of fighting alongside the humans against her own species' future. The irony was becoming unbearable. She was helping to prevent the evolution that could make her people truly godlike. Human Admiral, she transmitted to Dalton, I'm receiving communications from the planetary surface. The new forms are trying to establish a dialogue. Put them through, Dalton replied, though every instinct screamed against it. The voice that emerged from the communications ray was like nothing they had heard before, a harmony of countless individuals speaking in perfect unison, but with each voice retaining its unique character. It was the collective consciousness perfected, maintaining unity while preserving individuality. We are what you have made us, the voice said, carrying emotions that spanned multiple timelines. In your attempt to destroy us, you have forced us to become something greater. We thank you for this gift. Gift, Dalton snarled. You slaughtered billions of humans. In one timeline. Yes, in another, we never met your species. In a third, we became allies and explored the galaxy together. All possibilities exist simultaneously, until the moment of choice collapses them into reality. The battle around them intensified as the temporal Velthari pressed their attack. But now their strategy became clear. They weren't trying to win in the conventional sense. They were trying to create the specific conditions that would ensure their own evolution. Every human ship destroyed, every bio-vessel that died, every quantum torpedo fired was part of a vast equation that would determine which timeline became reality. The future Velthari were simultaneously their own creators and destroyers, caught in a temporal loop that required precise calibration to achieve their desired outcome. They're playing multi-dimensional chess, Dr. Vasquez realized. Every move we make is part of their strategy. They need us to fight them in exactly this way to become what they are. But if that was true, then humanity still had one advantage: the capacity for irrational, unpredictable action. The quantum processor that had killed Kira Voss contained not just military knowledge, but the accumulated wisdom of every human who had ever faced impossible odds. All ships, prepare for operation. Wildcard, Dalton commanded, accessing protocols that existed in the deepest levels of human military doctrine. We're going to do something so stupid, so irrational, that it can't be predicted by any timeline. The plan was insane. Instead of fighting the temporal Velthari, the human fleet would ram them all simultaneously, creating a causality explosion that would collapse all possible timelines into a single, unpredictable outcome. It was suicide, but it would deny the future Velthari the carefully orchestrated battle they needed. But as the human ships prepared for their final charge, something unexpected happened. The present-day Velthari, led by Captain Vexthara, made a choice that would echo across all possible futures. They turned their weapons on their own descendants. The moment Captain Vexthara opened fire on the temporal Velthari vessels, reality itself seemed to convulse. Her bioship's plasma cannons, designed to fight human vessels, proved surprisingly effective against her species' future forms. The evolved beings had not anticipated betrayal from their own past. Their temporal calculations had accounted for human unpredictability, but not for the possibility that the original Velthari would choose extinction over evolution. Impossible! The collective voice of the future Velthari screamed across all frequencies. You cannot unmake your own future. The paradox will destroy you. Maybe, Vexthara replied, her individual voice carrying the weight of a species' final choice, but at least we'll die as ourselves, not as your puppets. The temporal feedback began immediately. As the present-day Velthari systematically destroyed their future selves, causality loops started collapsing in cascade failures. Ships that had existed across multiple timelines suddenly found themselves confined to a single reality, and that reality was becoming increasingly unstable. Admiral Dalton watched in awe as the impossible became inevitable. The future Velthari, beings who had transcended physical law and existed across multiple dimensions, were being systematically erased by their own ancestors' refusal to become them. All human ships, target the temporal vessels, he commanded. Support the Velthari attack. We finish this together. The combined fleet of humans and present-day Velthari struck with unprecedented coordination. Human quantum torpedoes destabilized the temporal anchors that allowed the future beings to exist in multiple timelines, while Velthari bioweapons adapted in real time to exploit the vulnerabilities their species' evolution had created. The battle was brief but absolute. Each temporal Velthari vessel that died sent shockwaves through the probability matrix, collapsing potential futures into nothingness. The beings who had traveled back in time to ensure their own existence were being systematically prevented from ever existing at all. But the cost was devastating. As the temporal loops collapsed, the evolutionary acceleration on Nest Prime began to reverse itself. The advanced Velthari larvae, suddenly cut off from their temporal guidance, began dying in massive numbers. Trillions of potential beings simply ceased to exist as their timeline was erased from reality. Dr. Vasquez watched from her research vessel as an entire planet's worth of evolution was undone in minutes. The philosophical implications are staggering. She reported to anyone who would listen. We're witnessing the deliberate prevention of an entire species' transcendence. The last temporal Velthari vessel fought with the desperation of beings facing absolute extinction. It phased through multiple dimensions simultaneously, trying to find a timeline where its existence remained possible. But Vexthara's bioship was waiting for it in each reality. Her weapons locked onto temporal coordinates that hadn't existed moments before. This is for the collective, she said, firing her final salvo. And this is for individual choice. The temporal vessel imploded, taking with it the last echoes of the future Velthari. Reality snapped back into a single, stable timeline with an almost audible crack. The impossible geometries that had filled space around Nest Prime dissolved, leaving only the conventional physics that both species understood. In the sudden silence that followed, Admiral Dalton found himself facing a new reality. The human fleet had been reduced to fewer than 100 ships. The Velthari biofleet was even more devastated, with only a handful of vessels still functional. Both species had paid an enormous price for the destruction of a future that would never exist. But they had won. The future Velthari were gone, erased from all possible timelines. The evolutionary acceleration had stopped, and the larvae on Nest Prime were developing along normal patterns. The crisis was over. "Admiral," Captain Vexthara transmitted from her damaged ship, "I believe we need to discuss terms." The negotiation that followed would reshape the galaxy. The Velthari Dominion was finished. The collapse of the collective consciousness had shattered their empire beyond repair. But the individual Velthari who remained were different from their predecessors. They had experienced individual thought, personal choice, and the weight of moral decisions. "We cannot undo what we did to your colonies," Vexthara said during the formal treaty negotiations aboard the Prometheus Rising. "But we can ensure it never happens again. The collective is dead. What remains is a species learning to be individuals." The treaty that emerged was unlike anything in galactic history. The surviving Velthari worlds would be placed under joint human Velthari governance, with both species working together to rebuild the civilizations that had been destroyed. The biotechnology that had made the Dominion so powerful would be shared freely, while human industrial techniques would help the Velthari adapt to individual existence. Most importantly, both species agreed to establish monitoring stations at key temporal nexus points throughout the galaxy. If any civilization attempted to manipulate causality for their own benefit, the combined fleet would intervene to prevent temporal warfare from ever threatening reality again. Dr. Vasquez was placed in charge of the new Temporal Research Division, tasked with understanding the implications of what they had witnessed. Her first report would become required reading at every military academy in human space. "We discovered that evolution is not just a biological process, it can be a weapon." The future Velthari tried to use temporal manipulation to force their own development, but they underestimated the power of individual choice. Both species learned that sometimes the greatest victory is the courage to choose a difficult path over an easy one. Admiral Dalton retired after the battle, but not before establishing the Voss Memorial Academy on the ruins of Titan's Edge. Named after the young woman whose sacrifice had made victory possible, the Academy would train the next generation of humans and Velthari to work together in exploring the galaxy. Captain Vexthara became the first Velthari individual to achieve the rank of Admiral in the joint fleet. Her ship, rebuilt with both human and Velthari technology, would serve as the flagship for the new Temporal Defense Force. The galaxy was forever changed by the events at Nest Prime. Two species that had been locked in genocidal warfare had discovered that cooperation was not just possible, but essential for survival. The future they created together would be uncertain, but it would be their own choice. In the end, that was the most human thing of all, the refusal to accept a predetermined fate, even when that fate promised godlike power. The Apex Queen who had sneered at a human girl had learned the hardest lesson in the galaxy. Underestimating humanity's capacity for the impossible was a mistake that only needed to be made once. The girl who had walked into the crystalline spire as a prisoner had walked out as the architect of a new age. Kira Voss had died to give her species a chance at survival, but her sacrifice had achieved something greater. It had given to species the opportunity to evolve together into something neither could have become alone. The galaxy would remember the Battle of Nest Prime as the day causality itself was rewritten, but for those who survived, it would always be remembered as the day they chose to become something better than their own potential. In the vast silence of space, where the future Velthari had once threatened to remake reality itself, only the stars remained to witness the truth. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their tactics, but their stubborn refusal to surrender their right to choose their own destiny. The Apex Queen had learned too late that when humanity says no to the universe itself, the universe usually blinks first.